Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are really pointing a massive spotlight at a concept that's, well, it's so deep in physics, it feels almost wrong to even question it.
Attraction.
Exactly. Attraction, the forces we talk about, making gravity work, making magnets stick, holding atoms together, all that stuff.
And we're diving into a pretty radical framework for this one. It's called the Graviton Pressure Theory, or GPT.
Yeah, GPT. And specifically, we're digging into Part 7 of their material. The title is quite something. The Illusion of Pull, the Mystery and Mechanism of Attraction.
And the core mission here really is to look hard at their main claim, which is, well, that attraction isn't actually a force.
Right, not a real force. They're saying it's more like a linguistic placeholder, a word we use when we haven't, actually found the cause, the mechanism transferring energy.
So when we say gravity attracts, the theory argues we're using language that kind of flips causality on its head. It describes an effect, but masks the lack of a known cause.
It asserts this directional thing, this pull, without ever saying what physically carries it across space. What's the particle? What's the field interaction specifically?
If you can't name the pusher or the specific interaction, you're just describing what happens, not how.
Okay, let's make this concrete. The theory uses suction as its prime example. So
wait.
When I tell my kid the straw pulls the juice up, am I teaching bad physics?
Well, you're teaching the common shorthand, which GPT argues is the root of the problem, linguistically speaking. Mechanistically, suction isn't a pull force.
Okay.
That vacuum, that area of lower pressure inside the straw, doesn't exert a force outwards to grab the juice.
So what's happening then?
It's the external atmosphere. The air pressure outside the straw pushing down on the surface of the juice. That pressure pushes the liquid up into the low pressure zone inside the straw.
Ah, I see. So the motion is driven by the outside push, not drawn by the inside vacuum.
Exactly. The energy comes from the environment, pushing into the area where resistance is lower.
So the imbalance is key. The movement happens because the outside push becomes asymmetrical. It's pushed more from one side than the other, effectively.
Precisely. And that suction example, that's the core idea GPT applies everywhere. What looks and feels like pull is actually the result of external pressure being reshaped, redirected, or imbalanced.
Okay, so the source material really doubles down on this. It claims that just using the word pulls has kind of stopped science from doing a proper, what do they call it, a causal audit.
Yeah, a causal audit. They argue it's not just semantics, like arguing over words. They see it as a fundamental structural flaw in how we model forces.
A flaw that messes with basic principles, like energy conservation.
That's the big one. If you say a body, like the sun, attracts the Earth, but you can't show how the sun expends energy or redirects existing energy to do that pulling.
Right.
Well, where does the energy for the work come from?
Right. It seems to come from nowhere, violating conservation.
Exactly. So GPT insists that for pulling to be a valid scientific concept, it must satisfy 5 pretty strict requirements. And they argue that attraction, as currently used, fails every single one.
Okay, let's hear them. What are these 5 requirements for a real force, according to GPT?
Right. First, a named mediator of force. You absolutely have to identify the physical thing, particle, field disturbance, something that carries the force from A to B. No magic.
Okay, makes sense. What's second?
Second, a transfer of energy. The body doing the supposed pulling must do work. And that means it has to lose or redistribute energy in a measurable way. You can't just pull forever for free.
That hits the gravity point again, the sun pulling constantly.
Yeah.
Where's the energy loss?
That's the accountability GPT is demanding. Third, a directional mechanism. The force can't just be directional. There must be a physical structure or process that enforces that direction, that defines the vector.
A structure to enforce direction. Okay. This is tough for gravity. But what about, say, magnetism? We know fields are involved there. Does GPT say magnetism fails too?
Oh yeah, the theory is comprehensive. It applies across the board: gravity, electromagnetism, everything we currently label attraction.
So magnetism fails too. How?
We'll get into the specifics later, but essentially, it argues magnetism also lacks the traceable energy transfer and the fully defined reciprocal mechanism needed. Which brings us to the last 2 points. Fourth, a reciprocal reaction. Newton's third law. Standard stuff, really. If A pulls B, B must exert a quantifiable equal and opposite force back on A.
No one-way streets.
No one-way pulls. That's mythology, not physics, in this view. And fifth, tying it all together, compliance with conservation laws. The whole mechanism, mediator included, has to conserve energy, momentum, and angular momentum, start to finish.
And attraction just doesn't tick these boxes.
According to GPT, not a single one. It describes an observed effect, sure, but without providing the underlying verifiable mechanism that meets these criteria.
And this isn't entirely new thinking, is it? Newton himself wasn't thrilled with action at a distance.
Not at all. He famously called the idea of gravity acting through empty space without any medium so great an absurdity that no competent thinker could fall for it. He described the what mathematically, but admitted he didn't know the how.
And Einstein, general relativity gave us space-time curvature instead of a force. Did that solve the mediation problem?
Well, GR provided a new geometric description, a very powerful one. It tells us how objects move in a gravitational field. They follow geodesics, the straightest possible paths in curved spacetime. But GPT argues it still doesn't specify the mediating field or particle that transfers momentum and energy to cause that movement along the curve. It describes the path, the geometry, but not the engine, not the pusher.
Okay, so if pull is an illusion, a placeholder, what does GPT put in its place? What's the actual engine driving things, according to this theory?
Pressure. Specifically, asymmetries in pressure within a universal graviton field. GPT insists on this causal chain. Motion requires structure, force requires a pusher, and all actions must have traceable energy.
A graviton field. So like a medium made of actual particles carrying pressure.
Exactly. It models gravitons not as the force carriers of attraction, but as discrete, physical carriers of momentum and directional pressure. Think of it like a constant, isotropic flux of tiny particles moving in all directions.
Okay, a universal rain of gravitons.
Yeah, and when these gravitons encounter matter, they interact. They could be absorbed, scattered, or simply blocked. And it's this removal or redirection of gravitons from the flow that's key.
Because that creates an imbalance.
Precisely. It creates a local asymmetry in the pressure field around the object.
So under GPT, mass doesn't generate gravity like some kind of beacon pulling things in.
No, that's the critical shift. Mass isn't an emitter of pull, it's a graviton field sculptor.
A sculptor, how so?
Because its coherent structure, its very presence, interrupts the background graviton flow. It casts a sort of shadow in the field. It sculpts the pressure field around it by blocking or redirecting these pressure carriers.
Creating directional asymmetries, pressure differences.
Exactly. And those pressure differences are what cause motion.
But hang on, what about something like tidal forces? They seem so clearly tied to the distance from the moon or sun, almost like a direct pull that weakens with distance. How does blocking fit that?
Great question. Tidal forces fit perfectly, actually. It's about a differential in the pressure gradient across a large object, like the Earth.
A differential, meaning?
The side of the Earth closer to the moon blocks the graviton flow from the moon more effectively. But it also experiences a more significant shadow cast by the moon in the background field coming from that direction. So the net push from the background field is slightly different on the near side compared to the far side.
Ah, so the far side is less shattered by the moon.
And therefore experiences a slightly stronger net push from the overall background field coming from behind it relative to the near side. The moon isn't pulling. Its presence sculpts the pressure field, and the Earth's own size means it experiences this gradient differently across its diameter.
Okay, that makes sense. So the fundamental principle of motion in GPT is, say it again?
Motion arises not from being pulled, but from being pushed more from one side than another, always. It's the result of an external pressure imbalance created by matter sculpting the graviton field.
Which leads to this interesting concept they use, permission.
Yeah, permission. It sounds a bit philosophical, maybe, but it's meant very mechanically. The object doesn't move because a force commands it to.
It moves because.
It moves because the structure of the pressure field permits motion along a specific path, usually the path of lowest pressure or least resistance. The energy comes from the field's pressure imbalance, and the object simply follows the corridor where it's easiest to move. It's guided by the structure, not compelled by a pull.
Okay, this whole permission instead of command idea, it really changes the picture. Walk through some classic examples and see how GPT recasts them from pull to push. The aha moments, as they say.
Absolutely. Let's start with the most iconic one, free fall.
Yeah.
The apple falling on Newton's head. We always imagine it being pulled down, right?
Yeah, Earth pulls the apple.
GPT flips it. The apple is not pulled down. It is pushed from above. The Earth, being massive, significantly interrupts the flow of upward moving gravitons. It creates a pressure shadow above itself.
So there's less upward push on the apple from below than there is downward push from the ambient field above it.
Exactly. The pressure above the apple is greater than the pressure below it because the Earth is blocking the upward flow. So the net force, the imbalance, pushes the apple down into the area of lower pressure.
Pushed, not pulled.
Okay.
What about orbits, that classic balance of inertia versus gravity's inward pull?
No pull needed there either, according to GPT. Orbits become radial pressure equilibrium.
Radial pressure equilibrium. Sounds fancy. What does it mean?
It means the orbiting object, say a planet around a star, is constantly following a path defined by the pressure gradient created by the star's shadow in the graviton field. It's continually being pushed sideways and inward by the pressure imbalance.
So it's like constantly falling, but also constantly moving sideways fast enough to miss.
Sort of. But the key is that the path is one of permissible motion within that radial pressure structure. It's a continuous adjustment to stay on the path of least resistance within that sculpted field. Averaged over the orbit, there's no net inward force in the sense of a pull. It's maintaining equilibrium within the pressure lattice.
Right. Okay, let's go micro. Chemical bonds. We're taught that electrons are attracted to the positive nucleus by the electrostatic force.
GPT reframes this too. It calls it coherence resonance stabilization.
Whoa. Okay, break that down. Coherence resonance stabilization.
It sounds complex, but the idea is simpler. Forget attraction across space. Think of the electron finding a stable spot, a quiet zone in the surrounding field.
A quiet zone.
Yes. The electron structure settles into specific regions, think electron shells or orbitals, where the local field pressure, structured by the nucleus and other electrons, is minimized and stable. These are zones of low impedance, low resistance to the background field pressure.
So the electron isn't being held there by a pull from the nucleus.
It's permitted to remain there because that configuration offers the least resistance to the surrounding field pressures. It's like finding a calm spot in a turbulent river. It's energetically favorable to stay put because the flow goes around it smoothly there.
Stability through pressure equilibrium, not attraction. Wow. Okay, one more. Magnetism. Back to magnets.
Right. GPT says magnets don't inherently pull. Instead, they create anisotropic coherence corridors.
Anisotropic, meaning not the same in all directions.
Exactly. They structure the local graviton field, creating specific channels or pathways where the field flows more easily, channels of low impedance.
So when two magnets attract, what's happening?
Their fields interact to create a particularly strong, stable, low-impedance corridor between them. The external ambient graviton pressure then pushes the magnets together along this pre-structured path of least resistance.
So the alignment and movement is driven by the external field converging into these channels the magnets create.
Precisely. It's field convergence under directed pressure, not an intrinsic pull force between the magnets themselves.
This push model. It seems mechanically much more, well, accountable, as you said. It demands a mechanism. So if attraction is so flawed, why on earth did it stick around for so long, even after Newton himself flagged the issue?
The GPT framework points to something psychological. They call it seductive comfort.
Seductive comfort.
Yeah. The word attraction gives a sense of closure. It feels like an explanation, even if it isn't one. Mechanically, it lets the student, maybe even the working physicist sometimes, stop asking the really hard question. But how physically does it work?
It's easy, convenient.
It's convenient. And through sheer repetition and education, generation after generation, that convenience hardened into familiarity. And we mistook familiarity for understanding. It felt right, comfortable, so we stopped probing its causal foundations.
Like a mental shortcut that became the main road, and we forgot why we took the shortcut in the first place.
That's a good way to put it. It created a kind of feedback loop. The metaphor explained things simply. It got baked into textbooks. Repetition made it feel intuitive, and that intuition reinforced it as fundamental truth rather than a placeholder.
But that comfort, GPT argues, came at a real price.
A huge price.
Yeah.
What they call pedagogical and epistemological negligence. Basically, sloppy thinking that became institutionalized. Science has to be accountable to causality.
Hence the causal audit.
Exactly. GPT demands it. No motion accepted without a described structure causing it. No force without identifying the pusher. No equation left floating without a physical mechanism grounding it. The continued use of attraction as a causal explanation, they argue, is just not rigorous enough.
So looking forward, how does physics change if we adopt this GPT perspective? What's the new language?
It demands absolute rigor in description. Every time we might have said pull or attraction, GPT forces us to substitute it with the actual proposed mechanism. Field structure, pressure differential, surface interaction, and measurable energy traceability.
Replacing the metaphor with the nuts and bolts.
Always. Mechanism over metaphor. That's the core demand. #outro.
So the big takeaway from this deep dive seems to be this really profound shift in perspective. The universe, according to GPT, isn't built on these mysterious pulling forces.
No, it's built on permission. Permission granted by the structure of a ubiquitous pressure field, the graviton field.
What we used to call attraction is actually just the natural response of matter to imbalances, to asymmetries in the pressure of that field.
Right. Mass isn't the commander dictating motion via pull. It's the architect shaping the pressure gradients that define where motion is allowed, where it's easiest to go.
And that leads us to a really fascinating final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
If all motion is fundamentally about this idea of permission, dictated by the structure of the field, not a force, well, what happens if we could subtly change that structure?
Change the shape of the graviton field? Or maybe its coherence?
Exactly. What if we could, theoretically, sculpt our own corridors of low resistance in the field? Could that allow for kinds of movement, kinds of gravitational maneuvering that we currently think are completely impossible? What does travel look like if it's about paving a low-pressure road ahead of you, rather than fighting against a force?